This is the Daily Growth Discipleship Podcast. I'm Josh.
And I'm Chris.
We Christians are notorious for living under the feeling of having to be perfect. Perfectionism. And as a high-growth, highly motivated individual, I'm naturally tempted to measure everything I do so that I can see how I'm performing and make a plan to increase future performance. And in this chapter, I get to ask her about her blog post, Why I Need to Stop Measuring. Because I have grown up thinking that measuring is the best way to increase future performance. The old saying goes, what gets measured gets managed. And so I still think there's a place for measuring, and I get to ask Gretchen about her thoughts on this matter, particularly when they apply to the spiritual disciplines.
So that's a good way into a blog post I wanted to talk to you about in particular, which you had titled Why You Should Stop Measuring, or why I Need to Stop Measuring. And it spoke to me for the same reasons that we're talking about here. Is we seem to, and maybe this is really where I want to dive in and have a conversation, because I still do believe there is a place for measuring. And so I want to get your thoughts and feedback on this. Even for the spiritual disciplines, I think there's a place for measuring. I think we often don't measure the right things. In other words, and like you hit on it in your blog here, a lot of times what we're trying to measure is whether we personally are enough. So tell us a little bit about this blog post, Why You Need to Stop Measuring. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think I sort of categorize it two different ways. Measuring is, I think, when I'm doing it in my flesh, and examining is when I am allowing the Spirit to guide me, sort of in the disciplines. And, when God convicts me through, as I'm examining and He's bringing about conviction, have you ever noticed there's no shame or a negative feeling that really comes from God's conviction? Like, I don't bristle at God's conviction, but buddy, I feel shame and discouragement when I am measuring myself. It's a never enough mentality. Mm-hmm. And so I just recognize, because I'm a recovering perfectionist and I tend to measure myself a lot, and am I obedient enough? Am I loving people enough? Am I being a good Christian enough? Am I praising God enough? Am I wise enough? Am I humble? I mean, it's just never ending. Mm-hmm. And I think when your faith matters to you, and then you're involved with ministry, you just take it very seriously. Mm-hmm. So I found that as I measured, two things happened. I was prone to feel discouragement as I measured myself, and I was prone to feel resentment as I measured others. Mm-hmm. And both of those lead to bondage. Mm-hmm. And so I feel like that there's a difference, that when I am walking in the Spirit, that I am able to examine myself, and like recently learning how if God is the only one that's perfect, then why in the past, and even sometimes still today, why do I try to be so perfect? Why am I struggling with perfectionism? And I just began to realize how, what an idol that is, that's idolatry.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I like that you just said that, because I think that's so true. It's idolatry. We set ourselves up as our own gods.
Yes. And when I came upon that realization on Sunday, through the Spirit, I didn't feel shame from that. Mm-hmm. It was a good thing. Like, God knows I long to understand, but He's got to connect the dots for me, and that I'll just be, going along oblivious to what I'm doing, and He has to show me, who I am and why I am the way I am, and how it differs from His perspective. Yeah. So when He brings conviction or truth like that, it doesn't make me feel bad. It makes me feel good because that's where freedom is.
And it's actually inspiring. You recognize that grace that he's giving you sort of, because of that shortcoming. And I find it's just hugely motivating and inspiring to want to become better for the right reasons. I was reading a book one time, and this guy was talking about how there's he was using guitar players as an example, and he said there's two different types of guitar players who are better than you. And he says there's the one kind that he plays and you just feel terrible. You're just like, I'm never picking up another guitar again. I'll never be as good as that guy. And then you can listen to other people who are far better, by the way, some of the classics, and they just they just inspire you somehow. And he says it's usually just, it's in the spirit of it, right? And it's almost something intangible, but I think that's what you're getting at here when you're talking about when the Spirit convicts you. It's this non-condemning spirit that comes from it,
right? Because perfect love casts out fear. It basically comes down to it's either of God or it's of the enemy.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I am feeling discouragement and resentment, that is because I am not walking in the Spirit and I am cooperating with the scheme of the enemy. I am measuring myself. I'm measuring others. Other people are not meeting my expectations. And so I'm getting my feelings hurt or I'm either hearing their accusations, I'm feeling their condemnation or their shame. And then that just makes me get resentful and bitter. And so I think it's important for us that we need to understand our weaknesses because the devil sure knows them.
Yep.
And as Christians, we can just be blindly going along, cooperating with his schemes without realizing it. And so it behooves us to understand ourselves and to see where are weak areas. And for me, it's, the discouragement when I don't feel like I'm measuring up. And it's the resentment when I don't feel like others are not measuring up to my expectations.
Thank you so much for that, Gretchen. It really is important to understand the role that shame and our fleshly natures play when it comes to how we measure ourselves and how we measure others. And it's important to remember that our Father does not measure us by the same standards that we often measure ourselves with. And that should give us cause to pause for a moment, reflect, and realize that his opinion is the one that really matters.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Daily Growth Discipleship Podcast. If this conversation has been helpful to you, let us know. Leave us a review on iTunes, or you can send us an email at dailygrowthdiscipleship@gmail.com. Then come back tomorrow and hear Gretchen talk about the value of gratitude as a spiritual discipline.